So there's a tape measure on your desk. Each one of you get to keep those. In fact, if you want more than one, I have a whole box of them over here. So what do you think this has to do? And Scott, you cannot speak. In fact, I actually got this idea from this guy right over here. And so, but the next question right now is, what do you think this has to do with story? Anybody want to guess?
How do they measure up?
How do they measure up? Okay. All right, good. Anybody else?
How long is my life?
This long. 6 feet.
How long is my life?
How long will this take?
How long will this take?
How big was the fish I caught? This big.
What can I build?
What can I build? With my life?
If it gets wet, it doesn't work anymore.
What's that, Jeff?
If it gets wet, it doesn't.
If it gets wet, I bet you guys use lasers, don't you?
We use anything.
Everything. So you know what, guys? I put on seminars and workshops, and I speak occasionally publicly. I'm a fair speaker. I'm not a good speaker. But I know how to get up and give a presentation. As a matter of fact, sorta. As a matter of fact, I went online, and I'm going to be excited to come back and hear Marcella, because she probably will do a great job at talking about story. And because I went online, Marcella, I went online and looked up, the power of story for business and life. And there was so much online and so much information we can now obtain on everything that they say a good presentation is just robbing from a little bit of everything and everybody, and you can come up with a great presentation. You can put up a great PowerPoint, and I can have flip charts up here, and I've done that at Marketplace Connection before. And you know what, guys, I have heard so many great speakers and read so many great books and heard so many great sermons. How many of them do I remember? How many of it do you remember? There's so much good stuff, and we remember those things which hit something deep inside of our gut because it relates to our story and maybe our passion. But then there's so much good information that we just can't, my computer bank up here just can't retain anymore. So I've gone to church now for 41 years. I've gone to seminars for 45 years. And I can probably recite right now maybe 10 good sermons. Not that that information doesn't get inside of us and we can recall it, but the messages or the presentations I've heard before are those that involve some sort of story that stuck with me. So what I'm going to do today is something really different. I could put on the teaching hat, or I could put on the coaching hat, or I could put on the encouraging hat, or I could put on the Marketplace Network hat, and I could talk about my business, and I could talk about, how to raise 4 daughters, not so well all the time. I could get into the instruction mode, but really what I think I want to do is just tell you some stories. Is that okay? I just want to kind of share my heart, and something comes up that reminds us of our past, our story. Our stories are the good, the bad, and the ugly, but they form us, they shape us, they determine us, they become us. So, Jim, when you shared about bacon, bam, it was right there. Smells, sights, the senses trigger the story. Every single time that I smell bacon, and in fact, Scott, we were going down the line here just a few minutes ago, Scott said, "John, bacon, bacon." Every single time I smell, taste bacon, my father comes to mind. My father was a functioning eye surgeon alcoholic.
Oh, God. That's not a good combination.
In what order?
I was a Johnny-come-lately. My father was 41 years old when I was born. I had 3 other siblings that had all moved out of the house and were gone by the time I was 5 years old. I was raised like an only child. And the best memories I have of my father are on waking up on Saturday morning, and before I could crawl out of bed, I smelt the bacon. And so Mom was still in bed, and I would go downstairs in the morning when Dad was still sober, and that was my time with my father over bacon every Saturday morning. Those stories affect us, they form us. But why else is stories important? At the table over here, you know, we all know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two. Basically, we all know a thing or two because we've experienced a thing or two. And I don't know about you, but one of my great frustrations going to school in architecture was every professor I had was a professor and had never practiced architecture. When I got married and out of college, Jean and I were in our first year of marriage, and I had no idea how to balance a checkbook. Nobody ever shared with me the struggles of financial freedom, of financial burdens, and what it takes to be disciplined. If I only had the stories of my parents or someone else who could share with me how to process life. So I went to work for my first architect, and he was wonderful because all of a sudden I had a mentor and I became an apprentice, and he had a story of his life of how to go about the profession of architecture. And he said, John, you're going to sit down, and for the next year you're going to learn how to detail window jambs and seals and heads. And that's all you're going to do is detail window seals, jambs, and heads. And then you're going to go out in the field and you're going to see how they're built. And we're going to perfect over this next year. You are going to perfect based on what I know and what contractors know about windows. And you're going to become the best at that because you're going to be an apprentice and you're going to learn it. I never learned that in architecture school. Did they ever teach you anything in architecture school? Is that why you didn't become an architect? Yeah. It was so frustrating to realize that starting out in the profession, in a career, and as a father and as a husband, being part of all the baggage we have from all of us have some sort of dysfunctional background of how to just live life. So, guys, you got a piece of paper in front of you today. I'm going to start with the end in mind. If you take anything away this morning, this is what I want you to write down. You only have to write down this one thing. This is the heart of what I want to share today. The best of the story is yet to come. The best of the story is yet to come. You remember Paul Harvey? And he had a radio program, and it was called The Rest of the Story. And he would get into the plot of the story, and it was always really nice short stories. And he would get just ready to give the punchline, and a commercial would come on. And you had to wait through that advertisement for the rest of the story, and the rest of the story was always the best. There was always that little nugget that just came out, and you went, whoa. And so, guys, the best of the story is yet to come. So, at 8 years old, I lived on the edge of a forest. And I started to journey out into the forest with my playmates. And we would discover these great big huge Douglas fir trees that had fallen down, the wind had blown over, and they were leaning on top of each other, and the gigantic fir browse. And as you would go along, you would see this little opening, you know, through the fir boughs, and we would crawl underneath there. And inside, after tree falling over on each other, inside would be these rooms the size of a bedroom. And we would get in there and start to discover that as the rain would start to come, as it does in the Pacific Northwest, that we were dry inside these little rooms. And so then we would go home and we would get shovels, and we would bring the shovels, and we would dig out these little caves deeper and deeper, and we would go get the saws, and we would put more and more fir browse on top of these branches, and we would be completely dry inside these downed trees. And then we would go get tarps, and we would put blue tarps over them, and we would get 2x4s from my friend's construction company, and so the tarps wouldn't blow away. And if you were going by one of our encampments today and saw our blue tarps, you would think, you know, homeless camp. And then I would go home, and at 8 years old, and over the dinner table, I'd grab the napkin at the dinner table, and I would take a pen, and I would start to draw out how we were going to make these into multiple room forts under these multiple trees. And we dug them out deeper, and we had different rooms and tunnels that went different places, and it was so cool. Then made friends with one of the neighborhood's kids whose dad was a general contractor. It was in a new development area, building homes all over the place. And back in those days, you know, contractors could just throw away 2x4s that weren't quite straight, but some of them were 10 feet long, 2x6s, 2x8s. And we were able to get all that lumber, and we started building tree forts. By the time I was 16 years old, I had built 7 tree forts, and the last one was 2 stories tall, 10 feet off the ground. Inside we had our camping stoves and our Coleman stoves and our lanterns. We had asphalt shingles on the top. And when the neighborhood kids on the other side of the forest would come and want to destroy our cool tree forts, we decided in this tree fort we had to have multiple Coleman stoves to heat the water and mud. And when we pulled up the ladder and they came, they got doused with hot mud.
Oh, gosh.
We had sleeping bags, we had bunk beds, and it was so cool. So a few years ago, my wife and I decided that we needed to go back and see if there was anything left some 54 years later. And the only thing we could find was we found the trees with the scars on the trees where the bolts held in the floor and the roof of that 2-story tree house. So something was in me from a very young age in my gut that I couldn't get rid of. Now our story, I realize that not everybody has a story that forms your career early on in your age. I just think I was fortunate to share that story. But there were other pathways that my parents wanted me to go in terms of a career, being from a very professional family. I had 4 brothers and sisters that both had master's and doctorate degrees, and I was expected to follow some sort of pathway like the rest of my siblings. And my father was not real happy that I wanted to go into architecture, but he recognized that there was something inside of me that became my story that that he wasn't going to be able to change. And so he allowed me to go into architecture. So these things form us, and sometimes they form us not in a way that is painful. And we make choices based on our stories that have become that sometimes don't turn out so well. But in the context of community, we have a place, I think, to process the good, the bad, and the ugly. And that's what I'm experimenting with right now. What I'm experimenting with, and Scott's been a part of this, is taking 5 or 6 guys away for 3 days. And we hive off in a beach cabin, and I've done 8 of these now in the last 2 years. 5 or 6 guys. And the only agenda for 3 days is each guy gets 2.5 hours. If they want to take 5 minutes, they can take 5 minutes. That's their choice. But they have 2.5 hours. And the expectation is, guys, the only thing we're going to do is we're going to listen. Have you ever had 2.5 hours where you had a group of people that just listened? Because maybe one of the questions is, stories connect us to our listeners. Maybe that's another answer to this table talk question. And the most amazing thing, and this isn't any kind of official survey or anything, but the most amazing thing is, guess out of these 8 retreats, 8 times 5 guys is 40 guys, guess what the average time period the guy takes in his 2.5 hours?
2.5 hours.
About 2 hours. Why do you think that is?
I think that's the case because it is so unusual and luxurious to feel that you are seen.
Yeah.
To feel that you are seen.
Yeah.
The more you experience being seen, the more you can dig and share who you
Yeah.
are. And that takes
Yeah, another way to maybe say that is there's so much value and worth to our story.
that we didn't even know.
That we didn't even know. By sharing those stories, the additional ahas you're in an environment or an atmosphere. That's my mission statement for health and healing. You're in an atmosphere of great value, of great worth, and it allows the aha to develop not only for yourself, but to the others around you to learn and to grow and to change and develop. Because the best part of your story is still ahead, I believe. So here's the criteria. For 3 days, you get 2.5 hours. Chris, I would love it if you wanted to come sometime. Jeff, if you wanted to come sometime. Ed, Jim, Tim. Here's the criteria. Share something about your past. And when you share your past, you're required to share your shit. Why is that important? Because we all have it. And it's all a part of who we've become. But we can't stop there. Something about your past, something about your present, and your hopes and dreams for the future. Because the hopes and dreams for your future are going to be shaped by your present and your past, and it's going to be the next chapters of your book. Right?
Yeah.
You got a few more chapters to write?
I think so.
I think-
Marcel keeps telling me.
I think she does, don't you? So Marcel, is it Marcella or Marcel?
Marcel.
Marcel, I'm sorry, Marcel. So Marcel, I went away to this beach cabin 2 weeks ago. For the first time in my life, I hived away for 6 days, talked to nobody, and started my book. It was the most amazing. It's going. I told Scott it's going down as one of the best 6 days of one of the best weeks of my life so far. So it's developing the rest of the story. So the most amazing thing is most of the guys either take 2 or 2.5 hours, and what shapes them, I've just been amazed that every single one of those 40 guys shared something about their childhood that was very painful, and something about their childhood that was really beautiful, of great value. And then to see when they share about their present, the things that we're struggling with right now in our present, in life and in business, are those things which we're trying to overcome, that we're trying to develop and learn by. But in that environment, we're not teaching each other. We're able to say, wow, Scott, I didn't know you went through that. How did you get through that? And all of a sudden, I'm pulled into his story and realizing, relating, even though it's totally different than my story, realizing that really we're all struggling with the same thing. We're all struggling with how to process business and how to process life. We've got information ad nauseum. We're missing something. Another nugget that we get and need to be pulled into. So then when Scott says, my hopes and dreams for the future are, and I'm able to then support him in that, all of a sudden we've got a community that's processing together based on our past. So I thought, okay, this is Marketplace Connection. I've spoken at Marketplace Connection before. I kind of know what it is, but maybe I need to review it. Last time I was here in Bellevue, you can go online to watch the video. I share, I think it was 3 years ago, Jeff and Matt, I shared about my 2 years from hell. And everything that could have gone wrong in my life was going wrong, with 2 exceptions. I didn't lose a child to death, and I didn't lose my marriage. But I almost took my own life. I almost had a nervous breakdown. I almost lost 2 businesses. I was sued, and I was in financial crisis, and I lost a daughter to drugs and disappeared for 8 years. And you can go online and hear that story, and the rest of that story is still developing. But I went online here and I thought, okay, I'm speaking at Marketplace Connection today. What's it all about? Here's the mission statement. Marketplace Connections exist to foster a network among professionals from around their city and ultimately around the world. Okay, so John Sween, that's not very sexy. I don't want to go to another network marketing meeting. Do we want network marketing? Yeah. Do we want to support Scott's painting business? Sure. Do we want to support all? Yeah, we do. Do we want to learn from each other and get more knowledge? Yeah, we do. It's all good stuff. What's missing? Okay, so here's the next statement. We help foster good company. Wow, okay, so I'm getting pulled into something now. Great conversation and inspiring interaction. If my job today was not to get up here in front of you all with a podium, I would rather, and John, maybe we can talk about this, but I would rather that we had a lot of great questions at this table that we could dialogue together in community over the stories, the good, the bad, and the ugly, the past, the present, and your hopes and dreams for the future. And wouldn't we then all glean from each other in the hour that we're going to spend together? Okay, so that's what we're trying to achieve in Marketplace Connection. And I really appreciate what John Sween's doing with then breaking this down into the discovery groups and further marketing groups that are going on with both women and downtown Edmonds and so forth. So if you guys haven't got involved in any of that, I would really encourage you to do something, because this environment, you can only go so far in having someone get up and talk to you. Okay, so I only have a few more minutes left, and I'm not going to be able to tell these stories. But let me go next to my wife. So 2 years ago, my wife's 87-year-old mother, who had survived cancer twice, got cancer for the third time. She was deemed terminal, and she went on hospice care. And she was still alert mentally, but her body was shutting down. My wife, Jean, comes from a family of 6 siblings. She's number 3 in line, 2 older brothers, 4 girls. Her oldest brother showed up from Florida and was visiting Mom with Jean and Steve's wife from Florida. They're getting ready to put Mom down for bed for the night. She was up in a chair, and she said, "I'm glad Steve and Jean, the oldest son, the oldest daughter, I'm glad it's just the 2 of you that are here tonight, because I have something I need to share with just the 2 of you." And, it was kind of like, "Okay, Mom, what is it?" She goes, "One of you is the product of an affair that I had when I was 23 years old." And Jean, my wife, is looking at Steve, her brother, and she's thinking to herself, as her sister-in-law is saying, "Well, Mom, what do you mean?" There's a conversation. What do you mean? What do you mean you have a deathbed confession? Jean's looking at her brother and thinking, "Well, Steve's got Dad's nose, Steve's got Dad's hair, Steve's got Dad's demeanor. He looks just like Dad. He acts just like Dad." And she's not doing the math on the 23 years old. Her brother's 2.5 years older than she is. And finally, "Mom, what do you mean?" And Jean's mom looks at Jean and she says, "Jean, you are the product of that affair. And as a matter of fact, your biological father was Native American, and that's why you have black hair and everybody else has blonde, brown hair. And your high cheekbones and your round face is not very German." And all of a sudden, my wife is in a state of shock. And her mother says, "As a matter of fact, your dad, your father, never knew that I had this affair, and never knew that you are the product of this affair. And I've never shared this with anybody my entire life." So all of a sudden, Jean is faced with this shock. All of a sudden, before her eyes goes this, "Well, no wonder I'm not like them." Jean's dad was an engineer. Jean's brother went to MIT on a full ride scholarship to his doctorate. Jean's rest of the siblings have multiple degrees, are all professional. Jean's parents came to Jean and told her at age 18 that we're not going to support you in college because you're not college material. Jean struggled through school. She was held back twice. She paid her way through university without the help of her parents. And all of a sudden, this flood of emotion comes. Oh, wow. I'm 64 years old and I'm just learning something very new that I didn't know before. That night, Jean had a restless sleep, struggling, waking up straight up in bed. Neither one of us slept very much. she went back to sleep early in the morning, and she had a song that she woke up with singing. And the song that she was singing was a song she'd heard on the radio, but the lyrics had been totally changed. And the lyrics, what she remembered most about the lyrics in the song that she was dreaming was, "This is for all to see." The waves that are coming over you during your sleep is for a purpose for all to see. And so she knew what she was supposed to do. She was supposed to tell everybody this story. And so she started with her sisters. And she started with our 4 daughters. Her brother Steve said, "Jean, you will always be my sister. This does not make any difference to me whatsoever." But what do you think some of her sisters went through in learning this information about their mom, this very devout Catholic woman who stayed married to a very difficult man? And so then everybody started to process. Some were mad at her mother. Some were upset. Some felt empathy for her mother that she had to carry this all her life. What is the purpose of this story? What's the next chapter for Jean in this story? I have never seen my wife come so alive in my life. I've been married to her 41 years, and I have never seen her so free. Because she knew in her knower who she was and who her identity was. But now she had an experience, a traumatic experience, that caused her to dig deep of who she is in her identity. And it has so inspired me. It has so changed me more than anything I've ever learned, to see her story and what it has done to her, no matter how traumatic it was. I have never seen her so free. Who would learn that information and go tell the world? She went and told the world, believing that was going to have more of an impact for her and everybody else. So, the rest of the story, everybody kept encouraging Jean to get a DNA test. She said, "I don't need to get a DNA test. Why do I need to get a DNA test? I mean, this has already affected me in such a positive way." So anyway, Jean finally submitted and got a DNA test. It came back this last September. 98.9% German Northern European. She wasn't Native American. What was that all about? What that was all about, Jean would say, is, "I know in my knower there is absolutely no dispute that I am free for the way I've been made, and the whole world knows it. And I'm not afraid to tell anybody anything about my past or who I'm becoming, and the next chapter's still coming." Next story, and I will end with this real quickly. I had a very painful leaving of the business that I started 26 years ago. I founded the business, me, myself, and I hope that doesn't sound arrogant, but we're all entrepreneurs. We know the struggle that it takes to build a business. And that business grew, at one time we had 40 employees, and I left there a year ago, November. And it was a painful It was a painful leaving with my partnership and my partners that I had brought in over the years. But one of the most painful things that happened was I had a right-hand guy. And that right-hand guy, he and I, he was the executor for the work that I brought in. And he worked for me for 15 years. Steve survived multiple myeloma 4 years ago. He's a walking miracle. He was a experimental candidate at SCC, Seattle Cancer Care Alliance, on an experimental drug, and it worked, 100% free of cancer. And he was excited to be back at work, and Steve and I have a wonderful relationship. But upon my leaving, my partners asked me and told me that with your departure and the closing down of your part of the business, that we're no longer going to need Steve to be a future part of the firm. And so my partners requested that I be the one, because I had the relationship with Steve, to let him go at age 61 after surviving 5 years of multiple myeloma. We kept him employed and active during his time of treatment. And so I broke the news to him. I left November 1st, 2006. So I left a year ago last month. And I broke the news to Steve, and it was tough. Several weeks later, the last part of November last year, Steve's cancer came back. And for the last year, I have called Steve and texted Steve every single week with no response. And so here we are, having 15 years of wonderful business together. My success was based on Steve's contribution. And not only that, but we were close friends. So I asked people's advice. Should I go to his home? Should I contact his wife? I did email his wife, and she did respond. I heard from other folks who had gotten together with Steve. But I didn't want to intrude on Steve's life. If he had to process the hurt. So when I was down at the beach house here 3 weeks ago, for my 6 days all alone, I asked myself, God, what is the rest of this story? There's got to be more to this story. And so I had the time, and I sat down and I wrote a 2-page letter, and it just came. I didn't have to rewrite it. I didn't have to change a word. I just wrote the letter, and I sent that letter off. I just got this back. Thanks, John, for your heartfelt letter. It's been a challenging year. My mom passing away in January and spending 2.5 days each week for the last 9 months for infusion treatments at SCCA, and after 40 years of getting up and going to work, the last 15 with you. And then going on long-term disability insurance has made big changes in my life story. How suffering in our lives can transform us. I have his serious but loving attention. We have so much catching up to do. Let's meet the first week of December. There's more to the story, and there's another chapter to write. Do I throw away business? Do I want to go to my grave? Scott, come on up here. We're going to finish with this. Do I want to go up to my grave saying, I wish I'd spent more time at work? You know that one? Okay, guys, so this tape measure is 85 inches long. The average age of a healthy male in the state of Washington is 84 and a half. Okay, so I am right there. 64 inches, 85 inches. I don't care if you're 40. I wish I had some people that were telling me those stories back here for life and business. Man, I could make some different choices. But I can't go back here. But I do have that. And the best chapter is still to be written. Thanks, everyone.